So, for example, when people are in that period of they're not necessarily thriving, they're not flourishing, but they're also not necessarily depressed or burnt out, what are some things that people can do to assist with that situation?
Okay, well, the very first thing I think is to acknowledge what you're saying and acknowledge it is tough. Collectively, it's tough. Individually, it's tough. Family-wise, it's tough. It's tougher in some situations than others. Like in terms of lockdowns, for many people living in Melbourne, it's been more tough in terms of everyday life restrictions. Again, we've had milder restrictions and briefer lockdowns in Geelong generally. And certainly recognising that some people have lost loved ones or become very sick themselves and had some ongoing health problems from COVID. There's also the notion of many people having lost their jobs. And many people, not necessarily having lost their jobs, but being much more restricted in their hours of work and their income, so they are barely getting by and might only be able to see ahead like a week or two to be able to manage with that time until they really need to be working again or getting some other income to get by. So it's worth acknowledging also that there are a number of people who might be even doing it tougher than us. So it can be worth at times acknowledging there can be different levels of toughness. For example, some countries where they've lost hundreds of thousands of people have died, and presumably most people would have a loved one or someone they care about, they know about, who might have died in those countries. So a lot of it's relative, but first of all, we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. We recognise that it's natural to be struggling in some ways, and that's where, fair enough to some extent, if we say, look, it's normal to be languishing or struggling or experiencing a malaise in different ways. But part of acknowledging that is to remind ourselves that we've got extra challenges at the moment, extra demands. So, hey, can we cut back a bit in some of the other demands that we have? Can we lighten the load a bit? Can we cut corners a little bit? So rather than just not being able to do as much as usual or as productively, rather than feeling like we can't help but muddle through, how about we choose to muddle through? Rather than choose to blitz it or be on top of things or to feel that we're mastering things, why not simply choose to muddle through? And the way I describe that to my clients is to say, well, if you can fall flat on your face and get up again, and then muddle along crawling on your knees, and then you're up and you fall flat on your face and you're up again muddling along, under the circumstances, that can be a coping approach. And when you look at it from that perspective, if you've done 2 or 3 little things that day, that otherwise you might have spent an extra 4 hours completing some kind of project on top of that, well, it's sometimes appreciating those few things that you've done. But it also does mean that if people find that they are able to engage in some task to some degree or whatever, appreciate that, even if it's only 60% of what you'd normally do. Even if you felt that you didn't do it quite as well as you normally would, appreciate what you are doing, because you're looking at it from that different perspective where you have taken some of the pressure off. You are prepared to cut some corners. I think that's the theme of ongoing long-term stress, to take some of the acute distress out of it. Give ourselves permission to muddle through.